Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Silk Stocking Sisters. I'm your host, Dr. Teresa J. Canada, and today's episode will deal with the issue of classism, its effect on educational achievement. I thought this was a very apropos topic, and I wanted to mention this because it's pervasive, and it's not just something that just happened yesterday. It's becoming more and more significant in our society today than it was even 5 years ago. 10 years ago. But let me just first of all provide some definitions. Okay, what is class? How do you identify the word class and how it's perceived in this discussion? Class is a group sharing the same economic or social status. That's how I'm defining it for this particular episode. And classism is prejudice or discrimination based upon class. And these are both definitions that I've used from my old school dictionary, Webster's Ninth New Collegiate Dictionary. I still have my old dictionaries, folks. I still got my old dictionaries. I'm still old school. You may go online and check, but I still have my old books. I'm a book person. I have books all over the place. I believe in reading and I believe in learning. So I have a book from the old Webster's Ninth New Collegiate Dictionary, and I just provided the definition from that particular dictionary on class and classism. So as a result, I want to discuss specifically classism, its effect on educational achievement, and in a sense, talk about it in terms of education, okay? Classism and education, that's the focus. So based upon the research, classism in education refers to prejudice, in a sense, against or in favor of people based upon their social class. And basically what happens, it leads to, situations where if you don't have this basic, because of your social status or your economic wherewithal, kind of leads to inequality when it comes to opportunities for work. And it may impact the outcomes in your educational settings, K through 12, pre-K and K through 12. And probably also higher education. We'll get to that topic at another time. So, here, how can we recognize, how you recognize classism in pre-K to 12 public schools? Because that's the focus. How do you recognize it? There's several ways you can recognize it. And you just, basically, I've gone online, I've done some research, and I found a couple of topics. There's a couple of things that take place. One, the schools that are more affluent have better funding. We've heard about this a long time. This is nothing new. The people who live in neighborhoods have higher incomes, have better funding from their schools. And these are public schools. I'm not talking about private schools. Newer facilities, they have more resources. They got, they have the updated technology. They have specialized programs, as compared to schools in low income areas. And let me just say, I can vouch for that because I was part of an experience that made me leave my neighborhood school, which is in Harlem, New York City, which was, as far as I was concerned, it was a great school. That was, for me, it was a great school. I have friends, and I was learning, had an excellent, outstanding teacher, but that was from kindergarten to third grade. And after third grade, I ended up going to another school in another district. And that district school in that neighborhood was a more fluent community. As I mentioned before, unequal resource allocation. So I leave a school that I think we had, I can't remember what little instrument we had you can blow in. I can't even think of the name of what it was called back in the days. But when I went to this new school, PS6, it had, newer facilities. It had kitchens. It had specialized programs for music and for art, theatrical activities, plays that were staged with all types of people would set up the stage and set up all the information that's needed. You had a wonderful chorus. You had a chorus. You had band. You had orchestra, and we played instruments. That was an example of unequal resource allocation between my previous Harlem school and this new school. So that's definitely evident. And part of it had to do with the issue of classism, all right? So that's an example of, what can take place when you have people of different social status and economic wherewithal, because that was a key piece that was significant to me, but different between me when I switched over to the school. But also the other thing that came out, because it was fourth grade, that educators who were in the school, not all, I guess, but I just know from my experience, they had lower expectations for students coming from the other schools. And not all the students who were coming from where I came from were low income backgrounds, but they were less income than people whose parents were who owned B. Altman or something like that. And that's what was taking place, or, who were high level professionals. So it was a very big difference. So basically, teachers didn't have the same expectations and they didn't treat you accordingly. All right. Now, as I mentioned before, we had a lot of resources at the elementary school I went to when I left my Harlem neighborhood. And so, of course, the people left in the other school, what they had, like, very limited extracurricular activities. They didn't have any special programs, enough to enhance the academic preparation for people to go on to school beyond the sixth grade or something. So that's the basic routine. And not much probably has changed in some of these schools, right? So, I don't think that, of course, this is like elementary school. So you have, different things that took place as you move up into junior high school, I said middle school now, into high school. And that means that, for example, that, what is it called? Tracking. They had tracking. So certain people were tracked the academic and some people were tracked vocationally. Because when I graduated from high school, I had an academic diploma, and that you had to pass New York State Regents, because I'm a New York State person. So they have certain things you had to do to be able to get an academic diploma, as opposed to, I guess, a vocational diploma. I don't even know what it was called anymore, to be honest with you. I have no idea, but I'm just saying I have an academic diploma, which is because I passed the Regents and so forth and so on. So that was also another classism issue, okay? So, you had the tracking, and some of the tracking took place based upon socioeconomic status. So if you're in different academic programs, you're perceived to have a higher ability than those who, aren't in those particular academic programs. So the expectations, you're going to do better if I was an AP, I was in advanced placement classes in high school. And typically that's not the case for, people from a working class neighborhoods or working class families. So, but I was in advanced placement because of the school that I attended in high school happened to have an advanced placement class I know I was in history, and there might be another one for science or something, but I'm just saying that was not the case in all the high schools throughout the New York City area. Right? Now, so the other thing is that I was going to, talk about the idea that students from low income backgrounds face more systemic barriers that make it harder for them to succeed. If you don't have food to eat, okay, if you don't have sufficient clothing to wear, if you don't have heat and hot water in your house, do you think that's going to be a focus for you to be able to pursue excellence in school? I don't think so. So that's something people have to think about classism, because people's situations are different. Their housing's different and how they have to live. And so certain things are more priority than going to school and studying or staying awake because you don't sleep at night because you have a situation at home that's not healthy, or maybe, abusive household, or maybe people in and out, or maybe, you got to compete with the, having no heat in your, or even no air conditioning. So those are things that may impact a person's focus when they do attend school. Now, the other thing, that classism in education can also lead to a cycle of, of poverty and constant disadvantage. So you have from generation to generation, students who come from lower income backgrounds, or who then are less likely to succeed in school, and they'll have fewer opportunities in life. So it would behoove us to be able to try to eliminate some of these barriers in terms of the inequity that exists in terms of economics, so that students will have the same opportunities as other students who have any other economic wherewithal, all right? So the key, thing stands that the potential, as I mentioned before, circumstances that people have when they live in, it may not be a priority to excel in school. It may not be a priority, because their economic wherewithal may be such that that's a priority. So if they don't have the economic wherewithal, do you really think they're going to focus on being successful in school? 9 out of 10 times they're not. But of course, there are the few of us, the few rare people who will still pursue and excel despite their circumstances. But that's not a regular situation, okay? It's very difficult to be able to circumvent some of that. Now, so what happens? What happens? Now, I'm not going to get into the higher education piece of it because that's another level I want to talk about in terms of educational excellence. The same thing once you get from pre-K to 12th grade in public schools, you then have to worry about and be concerned about what happens in higher education for those who are able to pursue and choose to go or able to go academically and or financially, okay? So students from low income backgrounds, they may feel ashamed of their social economic status, or they may internalize negative stereotypes about being poor, or, because I'm poor, I grew up poor, as if it's a badge. Well, that also limits their psyche. So I'll be talking about the psychological implications at some point as well, but not in this episode. So I'll deal with that a little bit more at a later time. Now, let me just briefly talk about ways that we can address classism in pre-K to 12 education. Number one, even though it's an issue now, I'm going to tell you like it is. You need to promote equity and be inclusive in providing the best education for all students, regardless of their backgrounds. I'm going to call like I see it. Yes, equity is important, and you need to have everybody involved. You need to include everybody, not just limited to certain people because of a certain class level or social economic status. If we want to have a better society, everybody needs to be part of the deal here, okay? Not just certain people. Everybody should, okay? But then again, there are those who think only certain people should be able to have the benefits that this society can offer. I disagree, but if you disagree, that's fine. But I understand, but that's not where I'm coming from, all right? But I just think it's very important because if you don't make this decision now, it'll impact all of us in some aspect, and not necessarily in a positive way. But I'm just saying, I've seen this, I've experienced it. I've been fortunate, I've been blessed to be able to have a quality education from my early education to my college degrees. And I've been very, very fortunate and very, very blessed. So I'm just saying it's doable. It's doable, okay? So the other thing that you can do to address some of the issues of classism and education is to make sure that you get adequate funding for the schools. And it starts early. That's why I think it's important that what you do early on is a significant difference, because it's kind of too late by the time a person gets to 12th grade. It needs to start early on, in an early childhood area. You start with the early age, and then that way it gives them a better chance to set the foundation. That's what the foundation is set early on, okay? Also, if you're thinking about political stuff, advocate for policies and reforms that address the basic causes of inequality, such as poverty and lack of opportunity. So if we can focus on those areas, we have a better opportunity to resolve some of these issues with, the classism that takes place in school and how it necessarily affects people. Now, of course, classism and racism in America is nothing new. And there's some research that, talks about some of that. I'll mention a couple of things. There's an article that was in, I think it's called CE Noticias from Miami. This was a 2022 article titled "Inequality in the Classroom, Meet Classism in Schools." Now, it was a sociologist and teacher Garcia Valdez, who first defines world classism as a practice of segregation by exercising the rights of a person because of his or her social class or belonging to a certain social group. Then he says school classism is defined as this discrimination within the classroom due to economic or social conditions. And I understand that. That can happen, right? That has happened, and that's still happening, all right? Teachers perceive a certain student a certain way, and they behave accordingly, and they have these certain lack of expectations for these students, okay? Also, it leads for young children to psychological consequences like low self-esteem, socialization, problems with socialization, depression, anxiety, and other kinds of issues that they may have. And how do I know that? Because it goes to my other hat that I wear as a licensed professional counselor. So I'm just saying, and I see it. I see it in terms of education. I see it also in terms of the mental health perspective. So, unfortunately, it's conscious and unconscious, according to this particular researcher. It's a conscious and unconscious social way, due to classism. And basically, where this segregation touches other problems such as racism, misogyny, and it's deeply rooted in the history of the country. So this is something that was an article that I think is of significance, but this particular article brought a lot of things out about the issues relating to the inequality in the classroom. And basically, classism is a huge part of it. Another shout out I go to, and this is probably leading to my next discussion when I talk about higher education, is a book that was written by Professor Dr. Jasmine L. Harris, who wrote about, what it means to be a Black woman in higher education. And she talks about how her mother was able to move different places so that she and her sister could get the best public education in the areas where they lived. So that was a smart move because where you live determined where you would attend a school. So if you have more funding in a district where you live, you're going to get better resources in the public schools that you attend. So we'll talk about that again on some other note when I get to the issues of looking at higher education in particular and how that has impacted our society. So that's it for now. Hopefully you enjoyed this and you learned something about this. And so maybe we can do something and you can understand the significance and why we need to do something to eliminate the classism that exists in American education, specifically starting from the pre-K to 12th grade, because that's the foundation of when people first walk into the classroom, and it builds up from there. So if you have a second grader who is coming from an environment that doesn't have a lot of support economically, or what do you think is going to happen by the time if that child gets to the 12th grade? So some things for you to think about, and let me know your comments, and subscribe if you can, thumbs up. And I look forward to welcome you to another episode of the Silk Stocking Sisters. So wherever you are around the world, around the state, around the country, around the city, thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.